Now, let's look into the risk hunting. To start, to help our customers as Black Kite, to have this process available to them, we introduced focus tags. Of course, in our patch management, we have all the vulnerabilities available. Of course, we cannot see all the vulnerability space, and there are certain limitations like OSINT discoverability. But under the patch management category, we have all the vulnerabilities that we can see. But focus tags are surfacing the ones that we need to focus on, the ones that I just talked about, the ones that have high exploitability, high exposure, and so on and so forth. That's how we started focus tags. I think the very first focus tag that we provided was Log4j. And since then, we are providing focus tags for all these high priority, high severity vulnerabilities for the focus tags. So, and when we look into focus tags, we are looking at all these dimensions. We are checking if it is in CISO's cave catalog or not, if there's a public exploit in the wild, if there's a threat actor interest, if this vulnerability ever mentioned in the cybersecurity community or not, what is the zero-day status. So we are checking all these factors when we try to identify the vulnerabilities that might be exploited by the threat actors. And you see, some numbers here. Out of that 295 OSINT discoverable vulnerabilities, we checked if they are mentioned in the cybersecurity community or not. 146 of them mentioned. We check if there's a public exploit POC in the wild, even though there is no active confirmed exploitation of the vulnerabilities by the threat actors. We also checked, active exploitation by the threat actors. We do not, just rely on the CISA's cave catalog. We want to get these things before they ended up in the CISA's cave catalog. So we use our own sources to check if there's active exploitation by the threat actors. And we check if it is in cave or not. So we looked into all these things to understand the nature of the vulnerability. And out of these 295, for instance, 79 of them have all these 4 attributes. Those are very significant indicators for us to decide if we need to provide a focus tag for that specific vulnerability, so that our customers can filter by the focus tags and they can see the exposure. And if you look into the CVEs levels of the vulnerabilities that we apply to focus tag, most of them are in the critical zone, but there are also high and medium level CVEs that we provided. And this is also very interesting. When EPSS is high, it is very obvious that there is active exploitation of the vulnerability, and we provide a focus tag for those high EPSS values right away. But if you look into our focus tags, only maybe 9.2% of the focus tags, they had an EPSS value around 90%. 36% of the focus tags that we applied for a vulnerability, they have an initial EPSS value very, very low, like between 0 and 0.5%. The reason that we provide a focus tag for that vulnerability is by looking at the other indicators, right? If there's an exploit POC in the wild, if it is a remote code execution vulnerability or not, if it is a vulnerability in a very popular product. So all these things comes into the picture. Our vulnerability researchers, they have a very good sense of understanding if a vulnerability will be exploited by the threat actors in the near future. To give an example, when the clear vulnerability was discovered, right away, my team, we said that this is a vulnerability, a very critical vulnerability on a managed file transfer servers. And we know that Club ransomware group, they love these vulnerabilities and they will probably do something about it. And I think it was a week later, it was all over the news that Club ransomware started a mass exploitation of that vulnerability. So we have a very good sense of it. And we want to share that sense with our customers. That's why on Black Kite platform we have a page called Risk Intelligence, where you have vulnerabilities tab that you can go through all these metrics, all these indicators that we use in our research. We share that transparently with our customers so that they can even do their own analysis. They can filter by any of these metrics that we use, like if it is in KEV or not, if there's an exploit POC in the wild or not, and they can see the exposure, and they can even look into the initial exposure and the current exposure. Like maybe the initial exposure is very, very high, but by working with the vendors, you can bring down the current exposure, and you can track the exposure in time with this risk intelligence page, and by combining this with Black Kite breach and outreach efforts on our platform. And now we introduce a new feature called vulnerability cards. They are like baseball cards that we used to have in our childhood. And in these vulnerability cards, we provide all the information about that CVE that we collect. You don't have to go through several resources to search for it. We have the CVEs value, EPSS value, if it is in KEV or not, what is the exploitability, if there is an exploit POC, if there is any mentioned in the community. We provide the description, we provide our own notes about this vulnerability. If you still want to ask questions about this vulnerability to your vendors, we also recommend what questions that you need to ask your vendors. But of course, at the end, what we want is to manage the risk instead of managing the questionnaires. So we want our customers to focus on tracking the remediation, but they can still want to put extra steps and ask questions to their vendors, and the recommended actions, and the exposure, which of their vendors are susceptible to that specific CVE. So in one card, we provide all this information that our customers can see their exposure, and they can start an outreach. And as I said, we looked into 250,000 companies on our platform monitored, and we checked several parameters about these OSINT discoverable CVEs. But before going that, I want to emphasize again, these vulnerability cards are there for our customers so that they can start their own investigation about the vulnerability without going through several tools, several resources in the cyberspace. Now, when we analyze all these vulnerabilities, when we check which products they have more exposure, we see that Microsoft, Ivanti, Apache are at top. They align with our first analysis, but now the difference is that we are checking the susceptibility on these 250,000 companies. So and you can see one more important thing. The number one is not Microsoft. The number one is the open source. Open source products, the vulnerabilities on the open source products. Based on our study, 12% of that 250,000 companies are susceptible to one of those vulnerabilities. I think that's very important. We usually focus on vulnerabilities on these products like Microsoft, Ivanti, Apache, and so on and so forth. But open source is highly concentrated when it comes to OSINT discoverable, exploitable vulnerabilities. And we also looked into the geographical distribution of the companies susceptible to these OSINT discoverable vulnerabilities. And of course, the US is number one. 56% of the companies susceptible to these high priority vulnerabilities are in US. And there are other countries that you can see across the globe, but usually it is in US. Another interesting stats that we have is the industry distribution of these companies suspected to high priority OSINT discoverable vulnerabilities. You see on the left is the industry distribution based on this vulnerability susceptibility. On the right, you see the ransomware victims in 2024. And you can see the top 5 is almost the same, except like there's an exception of construction here on the ransomware side. But besides that one, manufacturing, professional and technical services, healthcare, finance and information, they are always in the top space for both the vulnerabilities and on the ransomware victim side. And that's not a coincidence, right? ransomware groups, number one attack vector based on our observation is the exploiting the vulnerabilities. Number two is the social engineering. In other reports, you can see this, the switch. Number one is social engineering. Number two is exploiting the vulnerabilities. It is very difficult to decouple them. Usually, these ransomware groups, they use them together. But for initial access, based on our study, exploitation of vulnerabilities is quite high. It's number one or number two. And these graphs side by side shows that correlation. And that's why we want to help TPRM professionals to focus on the focus tags on our platform, because these focus tags they are filtered for our customers by looking at all these metrics that I mentioned: severity, exploitability, exposure, and so on and so forth, so that they can really start focusing on these things and starting to reach out their vendors. On our platform, they can click on filter and select any focus text associated with a vulnerability. They can see the companies they have a problem, they are susceptible to these vulnerabilities. They can click on this new vendor outreach, a button to start an outreach automatically. With one click, they can reach out to hundreds of vendors through our platform. And these focus texts, they have all the details related to these vulnerabilities, like in vulnerability cards, all the remediation recommended actions, the remediation steps, references, everything is there for the vendor. So it's not like we are questioning the vendor, interrogating the vendor. Hey, do you have this problem? This is a CVE publishing this product. Instead, we are providing an intelligence, a risk intelligence with the vendor, so that they can focus on the remediation. They will be very, very appreciative when you have the risk intelligence in your hand, saying that, hey, there's a CV, there are these problems, and on several assets. So if they click on these related findings, you will see the IP addresses that we discovered the product and the version. So now the vendors, they just need to check that IP address instead of going through all the inventory. Right, they will check their IP address, they will see the product, they will see the version, they will see the CV, and they will go through the recommended actions, providing the intelligence to solve the problem. And on your side, instead of keep asking questions, have you solved it, have you solved it, have you solved it, you will just track the remediation on our platform. When they remediate, it will be reflected on the platform, and you will only track the remediation. And on the risk intelligence page, we have all these, focus tags, vulnerabilities that you can track. You can track the exposure. You don't have to worry about the ones that you don't have an exposure, right? If there's an exposure, those are the things that we need to worry about, and you need to start the outreach. And what we see as the future of TPRM from risk associated with vulnerabilities perspective is we can be proactive. We don't have to be reactive anymore. We can be proactive. We can proactively reach out to vendors saying that, hey, you have this vulnerability that might be exploited by the threat actors. Take action now so that we don't be impacted by this problem. That's why the speed, accuracy, and transparency is very important. Those are our pillars on our platform, and I will touch base on several of those. For the speed part, so we usually compare our focus tags associated with vulnerabilities with the time date added to KEV. So on this timeline, you see that this arrow showing date added to KEV, and you can see that the focus tags release time is sometimes like 3 months before the 36 of the focus tags out of these 295 that I talk about. We publish a focus tag 3 months before that vulnerability added to KEV. And you can see others here, and we are very quick about it. We applied a focus tag for 82% of these OSINT discoverable vulnerabilities and also publishing KEV before they were added to KEV or within 24 hours of their addition to KEV. We are probably the fastest in this space when it comes to providing risk intelligence associated with these high priority CVEs for your supply chain, for your vendors. And we also, we we emphasize the accuracy. We are very transparent about it. Of course, there might be false positives, but we have the lowest false positive rate, and the transparency is very important. So whenever we publish a focus text around the vulnerability, we have a confidence level attached to it. We have three levels of confidence: very high, high, and medium. Very high means that we can identify the product and its version, vulnerable version, and that company is using that specific version. High means that we can identify the product, we cannot identify the version, but except the latest version, all the versions are vulnerable. And we know that vendors might be slow when it comes to patching cadence, and they might not even aware of there's a problem on that product. So it's very highly likely that they haven't patched it yet, and you can inform them. Medium means that we can identify the product, we cannot identify the version, but it's a very, very, very important vulnerability. Even though only a subset of versions are vulnerable, we want to inform you. Some of our customers, they still prefer to reach out to their vendors and to talk about it. Some of our vendors say that it's good to know that this vendor might be susceptible. I will not, reach out to vendor, but it's good to know. And we rarely use medium, as you can see throughout every month. The confidence levels of the focus text that we provided about the vulnerabilities in this graph. And what we claim here is that focus tags is enabling the smart TPRM decisions when it comes to risk associated with vulnerabilities. Now, instead of going through all these hundreds of vulnerabilities or being in the dark, you have a visibility in your supply chain about those vulnerabilities. Now, the next step, when you have that intelligence, so to reach out to your vendor, to engage with the vendor by providing the risk intelligence. In the traditional risk response driven by the question set, so when there's no intelligence, we send questions to all the vendors, and asking the same three questions. Do you have this problem? Have you solved it? Does it affect my systems or data? But this system unintentionally creating small interrogation rooms on the vendor side, because they are receiving all these questions from from all their clients, and it becomes very difficult for them to reply back. And what we see is that sometimes they don't have any information. Even you receive a response, the response is we are investigating it, or maybe they don't have a clear digital inventory, and they think they don't have the problem, but they have the problem. That's why we need to transform that vendor engagement by providing risk response driven by risk intelligence. Now, instead of asking questions, you are targeting the vendor susceptible to those vulnerabilities, and you are saying that, hey, we discovered that you have this vulnerability on this IT asset. You are specifically giving the address, right, the IP address, and the product information, version information, everything. And you are also saying that, hey, these are the list of recommended actions. Now they can take actions instead of replying to you. They can take actions, and you can track those actions instead of tracking the responses. That's why Black Kite transforms the vendor collaboration by combining risk intelligence with the vendor engagement on our Black Kite bridge. And instead of looking at from a questionnaire perspective, we are looking at from a remediation perspective with our outreach report for a specific focus tag that was created on our platform. So there is a new way of managing the risk associated with the vulnerabilities in the third-party risk management space. So we need to go beyond one-dimensional vulnerability management. And when people go with the one-dimensional vulnerability management, that becomes an impossible job, so we give up. We don't have to give up. There is a way to do it. There is a way to have multi-dimensional approach of risk management associated to vulnerabilities for our supply chain, which you can increase your remediation rates to between 70% to 100%. That's what we receive as feedback from our customers by following these steps that I mentioned in this report. so that we can create an intelligence network instead of a questionnaire proliferation network. And what we advocate a lot these days is the risk detection and response. There's threat detection and response. We can borrow that concept from the CTI space and bring it to the TPRM space, where you can actively do risk hunting, like the investigation of emerging risk on our risk intelligence page. Once you have the risk intelligence, which is actionable and transparent, you can start a rapid response actions by participating with the third parties, and you can remediate you can track the remediations by using the Black Kite bridge. That's actually all that I have. Thank you for listening and for your patience.